So, advertising. What is advertising? Well, if I look up the noun, which I did, it's the activity or profession of producing advertisements for commercial products or services. So, I mean, advertising, as you know, whether intentionally or subtly, is all around us these days. Why do people advertise? They're looking to sell their products just for brand recognition. They're looking to market their products. They're looking to traffic consumers to their stores or their websites. They're looking to announce new products. And with an election cycle taking place right now, there are many political ads on the TV these days. If there's anything that you see when you are watching a television program live, it's definitely political ads right now. So there are a couple of different types of advertising, though. There is, yes, Elizabeth says it drives her crazy. It drives me crazy too. I have to be honest. It drives me so nuts that I very rarely watch live TV during political season, and I try not to even watch anything other than my local news to see what the weather is going to be, because we're just so inundated these days with just being bombarded with political ads and every other type of ads. If it's not a political ad, it's an ad for some type of medicine for an ailment that you probably don't even have, but after watching the ad, you probably think you have it. So, these types of ads would definitely fall under category 3 of commercial advertising. Advertising these days, yes, with 100 different side effects. Advertising these days is so different than how, products were marketed 10, 15 years ago. I think that our 24-hour news cycle, we are always on our phones. We have basically opened ourselves up to so many avenues of being able to be marketed to, that, if this is, for the profession of graphic designers, though, it really opens up so many marketing avenues for lines of work for us. There's a couple of different types of advertising out there. There is your public service announcements, or PSAs, which is advertising that seeks to further the common good. There is cause advertising, which is raising funds for nonprofits on social issues. However, they can also run within paid media sites. So if you've seen the ads for the ASPCA, those are considered cause advertising because they're looking for you to donate to help their cause. However, they do have a marketing budget and they do pay for advertising as well. And then the third type, which is the type we've probably seen the most of, is commercial advertising, which is promoting a brand or commodity by informing consumers. So within commercial advertising, there's 2 subcategories. The first one being business to business. So that's advertising from one company to another. If you have ever worked at pretty much anywhere, you might see, I used to work for a direct mail advertising firm. And we used to have salesmen come in to sell us office supplies. So they went business to business selling, to promote their brand, why you should go through, Office Max or Staples or, Dunder Mifflin, if you want to talk about The Office. They did business to business. The second is trade advertising, which is consumer to product advertising. And it's intended not for the consumer, but for the various entities and people who influence consumers. So I just thought that this ad, I was looking for, kind of some clever ads. And I found this one to be very funny, this example that I found. It's for Isover, and they do thermal and sound insulation. So I just found the ice on one side and then the baby on the other side was completely hysterical. So that's why I picked that ad. So where do we see advertising? Well, we see it everywhere. As I was just saying, you can't turn on the TV these days without being completely inundated with just ads. They're on our TV. They're at the movies now. It used to be that the only ads at the movies were the coming attractions, but if you've been to a movie lately and you get there early, before the coming attractions, they now play a rotation of ads up on the screen. They sell, you're sitting in there. That's, valuable screen time. That's valuable advertising revenue that can come in. We all have cell phones now. Even if you're playing a game on your phone, it'll pop up with a pop-up screen every couple of minutes, to let you know that you can buy coins or buy tokens or buy another game, or maybe you should download another game. If you are visiting the web on your phone, and now there's pop-up ads that you need to dismantle that were never there, when we first had cell phones. We have direct mail, which are those flyers or envelopes or postcards that are mailed to your home or business. And we still have ads in newsprint, newspapers, magazines, bulletins. We also have ads via social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I think the Instagram ads are the newest. Facebook and Twitter have always subtly sold ads. On Twitter, it used to be a promoted tweet, which you might not have noticed. You would see that it was promoted, but that's all space that's been sold. I think Facebook ads are even getting a little bit out of control. I've tried to kind of back myself out from Facebook, give myself some extra time by not being on it all the time. But, 90% of my Facebook feed wasn't even my friends anymore. It was, different companies, and even if they weren't companies I liked on Facebook, they were showing up in my feed because, Facebook suggested that maybe I would like them, so head on over to their page. And then we also see billboards just driving down the highway or the street, and then, billboards just used to be one standalone image. However, there are those animated HD billboards now that we even see. So, advertising is everywhere. If you look at anything, just even, going out to eat and your placemat has advertising on it. If there's space to be sold, it will be sold. So we have 5 major players in the advertising industry. The first are the advertisers, and that's your marketing or your advertising department. Some advertisers, they do all of their work in-house, and that's how they function. So there's a couple of different, pros and cons with that. One thing is they can control the cost. If they do it in-house, they can control the message, they hire the people, and just basically have everything under their control. However, there can also be cons to doing all of your advertising in-house. If there weren't cons, there wouldn't be number 2, which are the advertising agencies. And those agencies develop their creative for advertisers. So, some of the cons of having all of your advertising done in-house is, you're an employee of, Acme company. You might not want to, kind of be not combative, but, go against the flow, come up with something that's completely different from what has been proven, what has been done. You may be more or less likely to take advertising risks if you are working directly for that company and if it doesn't work out that time. You don't want that to be on your record. But if you're in an advertising agency, chances are you're more likely to step back from that company, look at all aspects of the company, and just offer a kind of a better perspective as an outsider, looking in. You don't know all the ins and outs of the company, so you're better at seeing what a consumer might not see on a day-to-day, if that makes sense. I have worked where I have done all of the advertising in-house, and I've worked as a creative for an agency where, we did creative for clients. So I've seen a couple of, I've seen it from both sides, and I don't think that there is a right or wrong way. I think that they both definitely have pros and they both have cons. The other players are the media, which are, channels through which your ad is delivered. So that's TV, that's print, that's social media, those are all your, the media industries. Then you have your suppliers and your vendors, and those are groups of service organizations and individuals that provide specialized services. Now, does anybody have an example of a supply vendor that they can think of that might offer a service to organizations or individuals that is specialized? What are some, suppliers or vendors? I'll give you guys a minute to see if you come up with anything while I take a quick sip of my coffee that's sitting here. Think of if you're running a business and you wanted to, if you wanted to sell something to somebody. If you were in a production company. Okay, I'll give you an example. One of the examples of a specific type of supplier or vendor is if you are filming a TV pilot, you might hire a production company to come in and to do all of your filming, and then they would cut all the film, they would put it all together, and then they would help you to package it and send it off to the networks to try to get it sold. They would be a supplier or vendor. And then in print, a supplier or vendor could be the paper company you go through that supplies paper to you. It could be the U.S. Postal Service that sends out your direct mail for you. Those are suppliers and vendors that you would end up working with. So, there's a lot of different suppliers and venues based on the type of advertising you're looking to do, the type of media you are. So those are just some examples. And then the fifth player is consumers, your target audience. Those are probably, to an advertiser, those are the biggest player. They're the reason that, you're sitting there designing this ad and designing this campaign is for your target audience, for your consumer. So, who are the real madmen of advertising? I'm not sure if, I'm sure you're familiar with the show, which is now over, and I have not seen the last season yet, so no spoilers, but I'm waiting for it to come on Netflix if you've seen Mad Men. But it's very, very much based on the way that creative was done in the 1950s and the 1960s, and it's very much the way advertising agencies ran back then. So in an advertising agency, a conventional creative team is a duo comprised of an art director and a copywriter. So you can think Peggy as your copywriter, and I am legitimately spacing Don Draper as your art director. So this model was actually the brainchild of Bill Bernbach, and he's mentioned a couple of times, especially in season 1 of Mad Men. And he's a real guy. He worked for Doyle, Dane and Bernbach in the 1950s and 1960s. And during that time, this was known as advertising's creative revolution. However, today, advertising creative teams would probably look very different. Some agencies prefer interdisciplinary creative teams or brand teams, which have several additional members, such as account managers, IT people, interactive designers, marketing experts, and then, your graphic designers and your copywriters. And then depending on the kind of project, there might also be several creative leads, including a creative, a technology expert, a user expert, experience expert, or an account lead. So just things were done a little bit different than they are done now, but the whole idea behind it, working in a team, that really started in the 1950s and 1960s. So one of the most famous ads by I forgot their name, DD&B, was the Volkswagen ad campaign of the 1960s. So why was this ad campaign so revolutionary? Are there any ideas? Oh, that's okay. No worries. Definitely finish watching it when I upload it. You'll get all the same information. You can even start off at the 40-minute mark. All right. Have a good day, Sonia. So, what was so revolutionary about the ad campaign, this Volkswagen ad campaign of the 1960s? Compared to you had your Ford and your Pontiac campaign during that same exact time. I'll pull those up actually so they are a little bit bigger for you to see. So this is the Pontiac ad from 1960. It shows, big car, fancy, well-off people. Look at the headline. The most able pleasure craft ashore is a wide-track Pontiac. It's just, even their tagline, Pontiac, the only car with wide-track wheels. It's, big cars back then. Definitely big cars in the 1950s and the 1960s. So let's compare that with this tiny little Volkswagen. And then we've got the 1960 Ford ad, which is a wonderful new world of elegance and built for people comfort. So we look at the ads. There's a woman sitting in the front seat holding her child. You have to love the 60s. We have somebody with, look at how long that sloping hood is. You can fit 3 football players in the back seat. You can fit all of your luggage and probably half of your house in the trunk. These cars were huge. So they are basically showing off how big the car is. It's a boat. Exactly, Elizabeth. It is a boat car. That is right. Could you imagine if we were still driving that these days? And then, once again, back to the Volkswagen. So it's this tiny little car, and the headline, lemon. What do we know about lemons when it comes from cars? A lemon means that you got the bad one of the bunch. And you're thinking to yourself, why did Volkswagen put that as their headline? Elizabeth used to drive a Buick. It was a boat. Yeah, actually, my first car was a 1986 Mercury Cougar, and compared to, I have a Prius right now, but compared to that felt like a boat as well. Yeah, exactly. These tiny, tiny cars in this land of, in the land of big cars, and it says lemon. So you see Volkswagen and you think lemon, and they ended up working this to their advantage. So if you saw that ad and you saw lemon, you're now going to read the body copy. And if you do read the body copy, it all starts to make sense. So this is the copy. It's kind of hard for you to read, so I'll read it out loud. The Volkswagen missed the boat. The chrome strip on the glove compartment is blemished and must be replaced. Chances are you wouldn't have noticed it. Inspector Kurt Kroner did. There are 3,389 men of our Wolfsburg factory with only one job: to inspect Volkswagens at every stage of production. 3,000 Volkswagens are produced daily. There are more inspectors than cars. Every shock absorber is tested. Spot checking won't do. Every windshield is scanned. VWs have been rejected for surface scratches barely visible to the eye. Final inspection is really something. VW inspectors run each car off the line onto the function spruce stand, car test stand, tote up to 189 checkpoints, gun ahead to the automatic brake stand, and say no to one VW out of 50. This preoccupation with detail means the VW lasts longer and requires less maintenance, by and large, than any other cars. It also means a used VW depreciates less than any other car. We pluck the lemons, you get the plums. So, do you think that this ad would have been as effective if they put plums instead of lemon there? I don't think so, because all it would have been doing is the same thing as every other car. Immediately, we're the best. This is why we're the best. So you should buy us. And the thing is the Volkswagen was so different than these cars. They needed to have a different strategy to get Americans to buy them. You have to remember, in 1960, this was not very long after World War II. So Americans were not exactly jumping on the bandwagon to buy a German-built car. And they did this throughout the 60s. Their advertising was later on known to be completely genius. They did think small. So they, realized their car totally different than every other car on the market. It's ugly, but it gets you there. Capitalizing on, the U.S. going to the moon during that time. Presenting America's slowest fastback. That's kind of funny. And if you run out of gas, it's easy to push. I mean, these ads, they got noticed. And then another thing, the green fender came off of a 58. The blue hood comes off of a 59, off of a 64, off of a 62, all the different parts, because that's the thing, as the VWs, they just didn't change. They didn't change for years. You could still buy a Volkswagen Bug in the 1980s that looked exactly like a Volkswagen Bug in the 1960s, and you could get all of the same parts. So they were going off of the fact that, this car wasn't going to cost you a ton of money. There it is, the 51, the 52, the 53, all the way through Volkswagen. 10 years of Volkswagens look exactly the same. And then this is where they finally got them. After 3 years, the car that costs the least costs the most. So this is a used Volkswagen in a sea of all these other American cars that have completely depreciated. You bought this Volkswagen for less money in 1955 than this. Let's say this is a Ford. I have no idea what it is. The Ford cost you 3 times as much, and now it's worth $400 less. They knew what they were doing at DD&B, at that ad agency. They knew that it was going to be an uphill battle to get Americans to buy a Volkswagen. And they needed to think differently, in order to kind of change perception. And when I say think differently, think of another company that realized this. Apple. Apple was up against the same exact thing in the 80s, in the early 90s. There were many different PC makers. They all ran on a Windows platform. And then here's Apple, trying to be different, but also trying to gain some of the market share. So they wanted you to think differently. Think about what our product can do for you. And yeah, Elizabeth, they stood out to me because my sister and brother would punch the crap out of each other when we would see them. That's exactly right. They were punch buggies. That's what we used to do. I remember, driving around in high school, and every time you saw one, punching whoever was driving, which was clearly not the safest thing to do, and doing it to my brother in the backseat, which used to drive my mother bananas. But it's true. And my mom actually had 3 of these Volkswagens. She hated them back in the day, but my grandfather bought it for her, because it was cheap and it was a reliable car. And he didn't want, if she wanted a car, he wanted to get her something that was going to get her around, but he wasn't going to have to spend a ton of money on it. He wasn't going to have to spend a ton of money fixing. So, you know, it worked for them. It definitely worked. So some of our key advertising terms. You know, these are terms that you will definitely hear if you are in the advertising business, you know, whether it be copywriter, whether it be, you know, graphic designer. Yes, nowadays it is the Honda. Everybody has a Honda. Everybody's first car is either a Honda Civic or a Honda Accord. And if you've seen a Honda commercial lately, they are working that to their advantage as well. If you've seen the one where they're all wearing, it looks like a Letterman jacket with a number, and that's the number or the year that they got their first Honda. So randomly enough, I have never had a Honda, but I've had a couple of Toyotas. Apparently, you know, if you get one and it works, you tend to stick with it. But yes, exactly. I think, you know, I think Honda has taken over the reins, and that's what they're trying to do with their advertising. You know, it's one of those things where sometimes things that have worked in the past, if it's not broke, you know, don't fix it or try it again. So yes, back to our advertising terms. So demographic, you probably heard this term before. That's describing an audience by age, gender, ethnicity, location. So the facts about them. Benefits are the features of a product that are highlighted to consumers in ads. There are only really two real benefits, better and cheaper. An ad may highlight the supposed emotional benefits of owning a product. You know, so some examples are you'll be happier, you'll be more attractive. If you look at, you know, some of the makeup ads, you know, or the Neutrogena ads lately, everybody can get rid of your fine lines better. Maybe I'm just noticing them now because I'm getting a little bit older. Campaign, not just a political campaign, but an ad campaign is a time-limited set of ads. So campaigns may run across different media and for 1 month or 10 years, but they can be categorized together as they are the execution of a central idea. And for some reason, I spelled categorize like I'm from Britain. So let me fix that. So when you think of an ad campaign, are there any famous ad campaigns that maybe come to mind that you remember seeing, you know, any in print or even television campaigns? Which those ad campaigns bring about brand awareness, you know, and that's the extent to which a brand is recognized by potential customers and is correctly associated with a particular product. So it's expressed usually as a percentage of the target market. Brand awareness is the primary goal of advertising in the early months or years of a product's introduction. So, Elizabeth, you said drug use in kids as a campaign. As a PSA campaign, was that what you meant? Yes. Okay. Yes, you're right. That was definitely, you know, the one I can think of. I know I'm dating myself, but it's from the 80s. Was when they cracked the egg in the frying pan, and they were like, "This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs." You know, there were a bunch of those that went around as PSAs in the 80s. Another one that I can think of is. Yes, love that. Yes. Another one I can think of is, especially in the 90s, I do remember this because junior and senior year of high school, we needed to have a subscription to Newsweek as part of our history class. And Absolute Vodka used to run print ads in Newsweek. And their ads, which I can pull up, vodka ads. Their ads were always so crazy. And they were, you know, which is awful to say as like a 17-year-old who was clearly not drinking. They were the reason that I got into graphic design. Was I thought their ads were so cool. You know, all the different things that they did with the vodka bottles. I just thought that was the best. And I actually had this one up This is so old, but I had this one up on my wall in my bedroom, and my mother was not very happy about it. But I was like, no, how did they do that? I mean, this is back when Photoshop, I think I was working in Photoshop 2.0. It was black and white. This was maybe sophomore year of high school, and I was just so like in love with what they could do and how they did it. And I thought it was just the coolest thing ever. And I was going to be a graphic designer, and someday I was going to work on Absolut's, vodka advertisements. Those were my lofty goals as a 17-year-old. I have never worked for Absolute, but if they were to call me, I would still jump on the opportunity these days. So our last term that I haven't gotten to is the creative, which are the creative ideas behind an ad or a person or team who comes up with them. So as graphic designers, your ultimate goal, in your profession is to work on the creative teams, work with the copywriters, maybe even write copy of your own, which you will be doing this mod, because we're going to be designing some billboards. We're going to design a homepage. We're going to, our first assignment is doing a logo. So, you are going to be your own creative team. And let me tell you, this is a fun project to work on this mod. I think everybody's going to have a really good time with it. It's just going to be really beneficial to you to learn how to do these types of campaigns. I can't stress how important knowing this information is when you get out into the field of, graphic design. So definitely put your best foot forward this time. This mod, I think that these, the types of assignments that you're doing are just so great for learning real world experience. I can't, I'm definitely very impressed with the level of assignments that you guys do, in this program. So I'm going to see if, Elizabeth, if you want to take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll come back at my time, 11:57. So why don't we take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back. We'll say 12:03. All right. And I will see you back in 5 minutes. Okay. Elizabeth, are you back? Let's see. Yes, okay. And if you knew that I said that, then I will assume that you can hear me all right and see my screen. Okay. La, la, la. There we go. All right. So let's get started again. So, advertising in print. One of our first advertising medias is print. Um, I will say this. That was my first graphic design job was at a newspaper doing print advertising. I was 18. I just actually started college. I'm not 100% sure why they hired me, to tell you the truth, because when I look back on some of the work I did back then, I'm like, man, that really wasn't that good, but of course it was, the first thing I had ever done, and I thought it was completely the best, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about everything. Oh, to be 18 again. But no, there's still, even with the advent of the web and our cell phones and social media, there's still a ton of print advertising out there. If you still get the newspaper, you'll see that it's mostly comprised of ads. If you get, direct mail, chances are you get direct mail at your house. Those are your Super Coops or your Val Packs or the Red Plum. I actually used to work for the company that made Red Plum. So, lots of coupons, lots of flyers. If you buy magazines, you'll see lots of different print ads for all different types of products, especially, trying to think of the last, I think I still get Women's Health, and it's all, Nike and, L'Oreal and, hair care stuff, just tons of ads in there. And then there's also product packaging, which is a form of advertising. The way a product, the packaging for that product has been designed, there is a marketing team behind that, because their product is on the shelf with many others and they want you, the consumer, to pick theirs. So there is a ton of decision making that goes into, product packaging. Now, the one we probably see the most of these days is advertising on the screen and web. So those would be your web ads, your TV ads, your mobile ads. As far as web ads go, we have social media ads, but we also have those ads that take place when you're trying to watch a YouTube video that you have to watch at least the first 5 seconds of before you can skip the ad. We have our commercials on TV, which we've discussed in length today. And then we have mobile ads, which are normally, some of them are embedded in the websites that you might be reading. So while you're scrolling and reading a news article, you might read the first 3 paragraphs and then all of a sudden there's an ad embedded. And if you accidentally touch it with your finger, it pops you up to a new tab that opens, and it's a whole thing to get back to where you were. But there's also, if you're playing games, sometimes there are pop-up ads that pop up on your games, and you have to be very careful that you select just the little X so you don't, click on the ad itself and go into, your Apple iTunes store where it wants you to buy something for $3. So, and I'm sure people, anyone out there who has kids, I personally don't, but my friends are always telling me that, they let their kids play a game on their phone, while they were at a restaurant. Before they knew it, they had $10 in charges in the iTunes store because they had popped on an ad or bought coins or everything else that, shouldn't be that easy to do. Then you also have your advertising outdoor media, which are your billboards, your transit signs, posters. If you live in an area that has what should I say? Not public transportation, you might have seen, posters out there in posters in the subway, posters if you are even sitting waiting for the bus in the bus little terminals. They put posters there. You can see them. They're on the sides of buses now. They're at the tops of taxi cabs if you take a taxi anywhere. So anywhere and anything that can be sold as advertising space will be sold as advertising space. And Elizabeth, you said you're lucky that that hasn't happened to you regarding, I'm assuming, the iTunes store. So yeah, I would probably be super mad if I saw that I had a $10, bill on my Verizon bill. Sometimes it's bad enough just having a husband, because I swear he buys games all the time. I'm like, what is this? There is no need for $3-4 games. You owe me $12. Just kidding. Now, the other type of advertising is there is in-store advertising. So, those kiosks that you see that hold, the mascara, your makeup, if you go through the grocery store, they have, those cool displays like this one for Sweetwater beer, that is all product placement. So that is all advertising. That's all sold space. Not only did the advertiser, pay to have this kiosk built, but chances are that they've also paid for placement within the store as well. There are live feed boards, which are, those boards in the store, or even if you've been to the DMV lately. Unfortunately, I moved back to Massachusetts this year, so I had to go to the DMV a couple of times, and those live feed boards also, not only do they tell you what number's coming up next, but there's advertisements on them. There's installations in places. Everything, like I said, can be potential ad space. So something to think about. What impression does advertising have on your everyday life? Do you feel that advertising has consciously or subconsciously played a part in a purchase that you have made in the last few months? And do you have a positive or negative attitude towards advertising? And why? Elizabeth, I saw that you said that you don't have that at the DMV. Well, it's kind of funny because I didn't realize that we did either, but when you've been sitting there for so long, you start to watch the numbers, even though they make no sense the way the Massachusetts DMV does it. And then, you're like, oh, so-and-so insurance. Oh, so-and-so this. I'm like, oh, I'm being advertised to. So yes, there's advertising everywhere. Now, can you think of any ads you might have seen that might have consciously or subconsciously played a part in a purchase you made recently? Yes, you said, and sometimes you don't like it. You don't like that you realize that you're falling prey to their marketing. That's how I feel from time to time. I'm like, oh, I want to buy this. And I know for a fact that the only reason I want to buy this is because I feel like I've been inundated with the ad. Now, do you feel that you have a positive or a negative attitude towards advertising? And do you know why you might feel that way? I feel personally, I have mixed feelings about advertising. As a graphic designer, I obviously have a positive feeling in that aspect because, that's my bread and butter. That's, without advertising, I wouldn't have a job. And I think it's almost the way I feel is kind of reflective of the type of advertising that I have done. I don't get angry about direct mail coming to my house because I spent so many years, designing direct mail that I actually look over every single coupon that comes to my house because I know somebody like me somewhere spent a lot of time on that ad. And it's the same thing with, newspaper ads. Like, I understand, newspapers are they're a dying industry. And, my first job was at a newspaper, and there is a special place in my heart for the newspaper industry. And I feel bad enough that, I don't actually subscribe to the newspaper. I'm one of those people, but I don't have the time to read it, and I get all my news online. But when I get the free paper, I always, if there is an ad for, the meat market with their prices or any grocery store, I let them know that I saw, the reason why I came here is because I saw your ad, because they should know that their advertising dollars, they're working. If you went somewhere because of an ad, you should let them know it's, this is the research they're looking for to see if the money they're putting in, if they're getting it back. So that's, and then Elizabeth, you said that yours is positive, but it depends on the ad. And I'm assuming it depends on what's you're being advertised to or about. I'm going to assume. And you said, yes, correct. Okay. Yeah. And I get that too. If I'm sitting somewhere and I guess a good example would be if, I'm sitting down and I'm trying to catch up on The Walking Dead on demand, which no spoilers because I haven't watched it this week. And there's 45 Viagra ads. I'm like, seriously? Like, why are there so many Viagra ads, during The Walking Dead? And I'm like, what is their demographic? I start to put together all of the pieces in my head, about why I might, why they're spending their advertising dollars during that time frame. And then the same thing with, the drug ads, or I notice because I work from home, most of the days of the week, that if I put the television on in the background, most of the ads are for cleaning products, Pampers commercials, and it's really targeted to stay at home. I feel like the stay at home mom. And I'm like, man, but I'm not part of that demographic. I don't have kids. And I'm like, yeah, but most stay at home moms right now, they would probably be watching, this hour of the Today Show, and these ads, they are the targeted demographic. I might not fall into that demographic right now, but as somebody who works from home, I'm still home at the same time. And then Elizabeth, you also said medication and lawyer ads. There are a ton of lawyer ads on during the day. I never realized, until I started watching daytime TV, how many, lawyers there must be in my area, and their ads are so cheesy, and they make me crack up every single time. But after every single day, I've learned to just kind of turn the TV almost all the way down so it doesn't drive me nuts. Now, speaking of ads that might drive you crazy, when you're doing an ad campaign, don't be that person. So the ad campaign. An advertising campaign is a series of advertisement messages that share a single idea and a theme, which make up an integrated marketing communication, or the IMC. So your advertising campaigns might appear in different media channels across a specific time frame, like I was discussing, that often need to be clearly defined. Modern advertising campaigns often combine multiple online and offline channels, such as online social media, TV, OOH media, which is your out-of-home advertising, your branded packaging, and others. The ad that you see on the top of a taxi cab, just to say. So a critical part of making an advertising campaign is determining your campaign theme, because that's going to set the tone for your individual advertisements and your other forms of marketing communication that you're going to use. So your advertising, your campaign theme is your central message that's going to be communicated in all of your promotional activities. So the campaign theme is usually developed with the intention of being used for a substantial period, but some of them can be short-lived due to factors such as being ineffective, the marketing conditions not being correct, or if there ends up being competition in your marketplace, and if your marketing mix just isn't working out. So even though you might, put all of this work into an ad campaign, you might realize after a month or even after the first time that your ad airs that it just did not hit the tone that it was supposed to hit. And you might have to go back to the drawing board, These are just things that happen. Sometimes, you can do all of your test studying, your research, and things will just fall flat. So what are some famous ad campaigns that you can think of? Elizabeth, can you think of any famous ad campaigns that you've seen recently where, all the ads are different, but they're part of a central theme? And we'll see if any of them are the ones that I picked on my next slide. I'll give you a minute to type in. I always wish, and I had emailed actually the Zoom people. I'm like, I would love if you could get the ... like you have on your iPhone if somebody's typing, so you would know, whether or not they're like, oh, I don't know, or I could, clearly see on my end in the chat window. I know that if you're not watching live, it's hard to see. She's thinking, what people are typing. It's one of those things where you're like, oh, I don't know, maybe she left the room, or maybe so-and-so left the room. It's kind of funny. And the other thing which you can't see, and I've complained to them about, is you can't minimize the chat window. All you can do is, so if you ever see my mouse just going across the screen everywhere, it's because the chat window's either in the way and I'm trying to move it. So that's usually what's going on. Or I've closed it, I've opened it back up because I see I have a message. But while you are still typing, I will go to my next slide and we'll see if these were any of the ones that you had thought of. So the 3 or the 4 that makeup ads or clothing ads. Yes, they're like Nike, Nike's Just Do It. That's an ad campaign. I'm trying to think of a makeup one that I've seen recently. Like the Rimmel ones with the, I think they make mascara. They might make other things. And it's like the London look, that's an ad campaign. I had picked, the Dos Equis Most Interesting Man in the World ad campaign. Although I had heard that they're going to stop using him, which made me sad. But at the same time, I'm very interested to see what they'll do next. Then we have the Old Spice, The Man Your Man Could Smell Like. Every time those commercials come on, I crack up laughing. We also have the Nike Just Do It ad campaign and the Coke Share a Coke With ad campaign, where all of the Coke bottles had different names or it said friends. And if you have a weird, interesting name like my husband, you will never, ever end up with the Coke bottle with your name on it, unfortunately. And I've yet to see a Shannon either. So those are just some famous ad campaigns that are out there right now. And obviously, if those came to my head when I was trying to think of examples within a couple of minutes, then those are successful ad campaigns. Their marketing was, definitely successful. And Elizabeth, it took you a while to find your name. Hey, at least you found it though. I keep saying if I do ever come across one, I'll never drink it. Not that I'm not a soda drinker anyways, but I'll definitely hold on to it for, forever. So that way I can have it on display. Let's see. So the advertising process. Now, there are a couple of different phases of the advertising process, and this is in your book, so I just kind of, got the main points, and it's part of your reading this week, but I wanted to go over them in the slides. So phase one is not designing the ad. That is definitely not the first part of the advertising process. In phase 1, you are meeting with your client to discuss your projected goals and objectives. You want to learn about the client's business or organization, products, services, their group. You also want to determine your audience and analyze the competition. So during the time of the overview phase, you want to figure out, what's that demographic, going back to some of our key terms. Who is the competition? If I am working with Pepsi, I need to know that obviously their competition is Coke. So I need to know everything that I can about their competition. During this phase, you will also usually determine what your budget is, what advertising medium you're going to use. That could be, so are you going to do TV ads? Are you going to do print? Are you going to do web? Is web going to be, mobile, social media, YouTube? These are all things that you'll discuss during this phase. You're going to want to come up with a schedule and deadlines that both you and your client will adhere to. You're going to also discuss other parameters that might be integral to the success of the campaign. You know, who's going to work on this campaign? Do you need photography done? You know, all of these factors will be kind of looked at during the overview phase of the advertising process. So after that, you will move on to phase 2, which is strategy. During this time, you'll develop the direction for your solution. So you're going to examine, assess, discover, plan, and start your creative brief. So once again, in this step, we are not even to the point where we are conceptualizing, never mind designing. So a creative brief, which was our last bullet point, is a strategic plan or a map that both the client and the design firm or agency agree upon. It's a written document outlining and strategizing a design project. It is also sometimes called a design brief or the creative work plan. Most briefs are made up of questions and answers, and it's a handy format of the objectives of the project, the design context, and the audience. So the brief becomes the strategic plan for implementing all of your objectives, and it's a written standard against which your creative solution can be measured. So at the end, you know, when you are looking at the entire process, you want to go back and compare, you know, where you ended up against that original creative brief. You know, it's great during your debriefing that you will do during your last phase. And it's a way that, you know, professionals can go back to the brief if you need guidance, or designers can use it to support their concepts or solutions. You know, your main idea or your main plan should be part of that creative brief, basically. You know, it's something where if the client, you know, has stated that under no circumstances whatsoever should green be used in our advertising, and your designer comes, that should go into your creative brief. So if your designer or your design team comes back with a first proof for you and wants to show the client and it's green, you can refer back to your creative brief and say, you know, this client, it's stated right here, clearly said no green, you know, back to the drawing board. So it's good for you, and it's good for, you know, the client. If all of a sudden the client says, you know, how come you didn't make this green? And you're like, well, if we look at our, you know, our creative brief, you said 27 times that green was a horrible color and you hate it, so we really didn't want to use it. You know, it works for both of you. So try to make it concise and to the point, you know, kind of bulleted. It's not a place for long, elaborate written prose. It's just, you know, something that you can use as a guide, as guidance when you're, you know, designing or, you know, at the different phases of the advertising process. So phase 3. Coming up with the ideas. This can definitely be one of the most challenging steps in the entire process. You know, in order to formulate an idea, you need to research, you need to analyze, you're going to need some interpretation, inference, reflective and creative thinking. You know, what is the idea? That, you know, when you stop and think about that, sometimes that can just seem like such a daunting task in the advertising process. So, you know, that's when your research abilities and, you know, kind of one of the things you should do as a designer, and I don't know if you noticed when I was about to bring up my Smashing Magazine web URL, is I have a couple of go-tos that I use, you know, for myself as a designer. And I bookmark everything. If I have found something important, I bookmark it, because when I am at this phase and I need to come up with an idea, sometimes it's not the best time to reinvent the wheel. So I put everything in a folder, and I have design inspiration, fonts, where I can find stock art, you know, techie things that I need to know, fun, web stuff. You know, there's just all of these bookmarks that I have made. You know, when I worked for Benjamin Moore, I put all of their digital studio things in there. You know, when I was doing photography, I took, you know, tips on how to take jewelry photography pictures. You know, this is something that you should begin to collect as a designer. It's, you know, honestly, it will save you so much time, and it will, some days it might even just save your butt, you know, having these links. So I can't stress that enough, that you should start to make your own web archive. You know, during the different assignments and assessments we're going to be working on this mod, there are going to be quite a few instances where you might find, good stock art on the web, or, I'm going to show you a couple of different places where you can find and download fonts. So these are going to be all some really good sites to bookmark. You can always send me an email if you see a link during our live sessions and you want that link. I'm going to try to remember to put up a announcement that has all of the links that I've shown during our live session. So that way, if you want to bookmark them yourselves, you will be able to. I'll actually, I'll make a quick note to do that. Announcement links. Otherwise, if I don't make notes, I will forget everything. Seriously, I live and die with the reminders for my Mac, and they're on my iPhone as well. I have a reminder for everything. Go drink some water today because you're feeling dehydrated. Here's a reminder. You laugh, but seriously, I do that. So phase 4 of the advertising process. Finally, we're going to start designing. During this phase, Elizabeth says she's the same way. I'm glad that it's not just me. It's one of those things where when you're doing a million things a day, gotta use the technology when it suits your purpose. So phase 4, design. The idea is articulated in visual form. So during this phase, most designers start working by thinking with a pencil in hand. I am a sketcher, but not with pencil and paper. My husband is also a graphic designer. He has been doing this for just as long as me, and he is a big thumbnail and rough draft sketcher. He sketches out everything on paper, and it's always the oddest things too. Like he will sketch out his ideas on backs of envelopes, on napkins, on lined paper. Some of his best artwork is on this old pad of Super Coops paper that has his name on it that I think is from 1992, back when he used to work there. And they must have gave him a lot of pads of those paper, because I've seen beautiful, pen and ink and line drawings, and it's on this really horrible, sketch pad. But that's how he works. He comes up with the rough sketches and he turns them into comps, and then he does it on the computer. I am a big fan of sketching on my computer. So if I'm trying to come up with a layout for an ad, I might just use, circles and squares and shapes to just denote where I'm going to put a logo. I know my logo is square shaped, so I'm going to put a square on, my InDesign template, and then I know that my body copy, and I'll just use some lorem ipsum body copy, and I'm going to place that in there. So I sketch on the computer. Lots of people have different ways of doing it. I've taken many design courses back when I was finishing up my degree, and a lot of them required you to draw thumbnails and to submit. And a lot of times, because that's just not how I work, I would rough it out on the computer, figure out my design, and then after I was done, I would just make up thumbnail sketches, because I don't work that way. If I ever were to record my screen, they would be able to see that, my whole process for how I came up with my different ad campaigns I came up with, and that I didn't just go with my first design, that I moved things around, and that those were my sketches. However, there's definitely a use for having those thumbnails and having those roughs, because a lot of times you can bring those to the client before you put all of that work in and have a finalized design, and you can show them the different roughs and the different comps, and they, can look them over, and it is a lot quicker for you. So I will say there's definitely a benefit to, doing it, pencil in hand. So during this time, you definitely come up with several distinct and targeted options that you're going to present to your client for review. This is not the time where you come up with one finished ready to go ad campaign, because if you think that they are going to buy the first thing you present to them, 99% of the time, that is not going to happen. I can't tell you how many, hours might be spent making something and you're like, this looks great. There is no way that they can say no to this because it's awesome. But as a designer, we're just so fully invested in it that we can't see, why they might want to tweak this, or why they might want to, after all of that, change all of their body copy, or, change out the photo that you use for something completely unrelated. So, definitely go in with the impression that you're going to be working on this a couple of times and that you should have a couple of options to show them. And the couple of options also kind of can stop the process of redoing all of the work that you've done in one ad, because it gives them, I might want to take the headline from example A, but the body copy from example B, and I really like the picture you use from example C. So the more options, 4 or 5 that you show them, they feel that you have done enough work to justify what they're paying you. And I think sometimes if you go to them with just one option, they think, well, I'm paying you a couple of $100. Shouldn't I get a couple of things to see? But they don't realize that maybe you did a couple of things, and you just felt this was the strongest. So that's just my thoughts on, why you would want to do, a few options for your client. So phase 5, production. So this is implementing one's design solution. So in a professional setting, various design solutions involve, an interaction model, user testing. You might need to do wireframes, especially if you are designing a website for a client. The wireframes won't have a complete, design to them, but they will show, the flow and how a user would interact with that website. You might have some functional specifications, some developmental activities, quality assurance, exit criteria, once testing has been complete. So this is the time where you're kind of showing, especially in web, how it's going to work. Or if you are designing a TV commercial, you might have a wireframe that shows, or a storyboard that would show, how this entire commercial is going to be shot, what each frame would show, before you actually go in and shoot it. So phase 6, implementation. The solutions are deployed and they are put into effect. So this is, you've come up with your idea, you've implemented your idea, you've put your design together, everybody is happy, we're shaking hands, we're putting that ad on TV, we're putting that ad in the magazine, it is ready to go. So during this, after this is done, you and your client should really debrief, and review the solutions and its consequences, examine your finished product, and then also determine what went right and what went wrong during the entire advertising process. That's really important to both you and the advertiser, moving forward, so you can either do a better job next time. Maybe you need to bring another person into the loop. The debriefing is really, really important to the designer and client relationship. So now, case study, which is what you will be writing about during your discussion post this week. So what is a case study? It is the broad definition of a case study is it is a published report about a person, group, or situation that has been studied over time. So in advertising, because that's what we're studying, a case study shows that a particular campaign worked, or maybe it shows that a particular campaign didn't work. It's the case study on that campaign. So case histories give you an inside look at the steps advertising agencies and advertisers take to create a campaign and how effective it can be. Case histories show the preceding issues and problems, the response, and the outcome. And during that case study, creative is included. That means that if you are discussing a particular case study, you should show an example of the creative that was used during that campaign. It's good for a visual. So I will say in the discussion this week, if you can, take a screenshot of the case study that you're discussing, and if you can embed that image in with your discussion, just so everyone has a visual of the campaign that you ended up researching, I think that it will lead to more lively discussions this week. Because people will have a visual when they're reading over, why the different cases worked, and they can, refer back to that to see, oh yeah, they came up with this headline and that headline is really grabbing, or, they didn't use a lot of body copy and therefore they had a very clean design and I felt like all the elements really stood out. So I think it's helpful to always include the creative when discussing a case study. So let's look at the anatomy of an ad. So I had used this advertisement previously in one of my slides, and for my print ads actually. And in this ad, we have a logo, we have a headline, we have a slogan, we have some body copy, and we have our image. So image is the biggest feature within this ad. The picture of the car really draws you in. Then we have the logo, up in the top right-hand corner. And I will say this, studies have shown that users, your eye when you are looking at an advertisement goes in a circle this way. So our eyes immediately, the first place we look is usually the upper or the lower right-hand corner. So this is perfect placement for a logo for your company, which, their their headline is "Joy is timeless," and then their slogan is "Joy is BMW." So, they used one of their older cars in the ad on purpose. So they want your eye to immediately go to the logo. So it's a BMW if you're not familiar with the older BMW. So, the ad copy and the body copy, not really important. This copy down here, let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger on the screen. This copy, to enjoy a gallery of timeless classics, yada, 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 not really important. If you care to read about the ad, or you care about the car, you're going to read this and you'll go to their website and you'll be able to see all their older cars, and that'll be great. But the first thing they want to do is they want you to see this old car, they want you to see BMW, and they want you to remember, how cool that old Roadster was. Well, it's cool also? Getting a new one. So it's evoking a feeling, this ad. And I feel that this ad does a great job, with their logo placement, their headlines the correct size and jumps out, their slogan or their sub-headline is a smaller font than the headline, their body copy is the correct size, the image is nice and big. This is a well thought out ad.